folks, Phil Gallagher of ThrabenU here for another Monster Train video. Instead of doing a run for my daily series today, I wanted to sit down and talk a little bit of card theory in the post-beta world. I've kind of been putting together some thoughts for a little while now, and this morning I had a little bit of extra time and I decided to kind of like write out some notes and produce another theory video. Specifically today, I want to talk about the start of runs, because I found that the start of runs has changed a lot in the post-beta world, and I just want to kind of articulate that today and get you thinking about what I'm thinking about now. So let's start by thinking about like the pre-Friends and Foes update, where you only have the original 5 champions, and let's think about their starter cards for a minute. So we have Torch, Restore, Frozen Lance, Shade Splitter, and Drag. And of those cards, 3 of the 5 do damage directly to units, right? The Torch hits for 2, Frozen Lance hits for 6, and a Drag attacks for 9 damage. The overall result here is that most of the time you end up with damage cards in your starting deck from your starter cards. With the way that this game used to work, the only way that you could not end up with damage cards in your starter deck was if you ended up running Awoken plus Umbra at the same time in either combination. But that wasn't that big of a deal, because if an Umbra is your starting champion, you often have the ability to just take a champion that, like, Hulk smashes for 40. Or if you are taking this champion, your restores are damage cards, or at least have the potential to be damage cards 2/3 of the time. And otherwise, like, the spikes from this will kill all those backline enemies, so you're not actually under all that much pressure in the starting fights. So basically, in the old world, you were basically never in a situation where your starter deck didn't give you enough damage to very easily get through the first fight, and oftentimes the second fight, without really improving your deck all that much. But I think that world is gone now, because there are more combinations that can end up with incredibly low damage output in their starting deck. So let's think about our new starting cards. We have Queen's Implings, Root Seeds. What's the Frostbite card? The 0-cost Frostbite card that does 6 Frostbite, Blink, and Primitive Mold. Alright, just because I know I'm going to talk about this more. Foregone Power. No, I wanted that screen. Alright, and Foregone Power. So of those, 3 of those represent direct damage to creatures again. Root Seed kind of represents damage. Like, it technically increases your damage output, but it doesn't change the number of creatures that you hit. And in the starting fights where there's, oftentimes multiple 1-health creatures or one kind of tanky enemy and then a couple of 1-health things behind them, Root Seeds isn't increasing the number of units that you can deal with in a turn. I'm not really counting that as a damage card here. You can if you want. The theory is going to work out the same way either way. So now, again, there's 3 out of 5 of these cards that do damage. But now there's more combinations where your starter cards don't give you damage, right? Before, there was just a single combination that didn't give you starting damage. But now, if you go and pair, Awoken with this, or Umbra with this, and so forth, you have more combinations that result in you not having damage in your starting cards. And that's a little bit spooky. And in addition to that, the new damage cards aren't all that damaging. So, like, let's think about Plink. Plink represents 2 damage, randomly. Can you use that to kill a backline enemy with 2 health like you can Torch? Ooh, probably not. and you use that to always kill that archer so that it doesn't deal 9 damage to you when you took that plus attack trial? Maybe. How you feeling? Are you feeling lucky? So Plank is an inconsistent damage source. And what about Foregone Power? Foregone Power, very specifically, cannot hit multiple enemies on the same floor. So consider a starting trial in Fight 1 where you take enemies appear on every floor. You have a hand that has 5 Foregone Powers, you can't hit 5 enemies on that same floor. You hit one of them. And this is very different from something like Torch or Frozen Lance or Dreg, where you can use those cards to whack multiple enemies and do wave clearing a little bit better. So now a decent portion of random runs, not a lot, but a noticeable portion of random runs now are noticeably worse in dealing with Fight 1 than the average free Friends and Foes update starting deck would be. So you end up with lower average damage output on a starting run in a lot of cases. Now, do some of your starting runs end up absolutely stupid? Oh yes. You can roll hot with something like Stygian, like Tethys primary with like Root Seed secondary, and it's like, aha, I have acquired an incant creature after fight 1, and the rest of this run is going to snowball out of control very quickly once I duplicate that unit. There's going to be a lot of cases like that. But then there's going to be these times where you have 10 starting cards that don't really do any damage, and you're starting with Primordium, which also really doesn't do any damage. And those runs can be really scary. So let's talk about some of the awkward things that can occur with the new cards when you're playing random. I want to focus on Primitive Mold first, the new Stygian card that reforms randomly, because this card tends to be dead in Fight 1 for a lot of combinations, for different reasons. The reason one that it's usually dead is just because there's nothing dead in the initial turn or two of a fight. So if you draw 2 or 3 primitive molds on turn 1 of a fight, those are just dead cards. They do literally nothing, and you can't usually get them to do something even if you try. So having a couple of extra dead weights in your deck for the first couple of turns is pretty rough. And then if you do get them to do something, a lot of times the height of what you are doing is getting a Train Steward that's slightly bigger, absorbs some hits, and then dies because it has Burnout 1. So you don't actually benefit all that much from Primitive Mold as a starting card in a lot of combinations. Now, can you make that starting card good later? Oh yes, absolutely. When you've removed 4 Train Stewards and you have, one of the tomb units and you get to redeploy it every single turn, that can be pretty cool. But as far as the start of the run goes, which is often very volatile before you have a chance to sculpt it the way that you want it to be, that's not the best place to be. Also, Primitive Mold exists primarily to reform Little Fade repeatedly, because no matter what line you're playing Little Fade on, you would really like to reform her a couple of different times. But what happens if you're starting with Queen's Implings now? And your reform pool gets diluted with a bunch of Queen's Implings, and you're not actually getting to scale your champion. Are you going to make it through the fight okay if you're just getting 10 additional damage each turn? Maybe fight 1 will go okay, but what about in fight 2 when you're dealing with 200 health on an enemy unit? I think the Sweep boss has 190 HP, and with Sweep she's going to crush Little Fade a good portion of the time anyway in a couple of hits. So you end up with a lot of awkward situations. Similarly, what if you're doing like an incant Soul Guard run? And what if you start with imps or dregs, and then you don't actually have all that many spells so that you can incant enough times to actually kill the bosses? So there's a lot of other situations like this that I can go into, but I think I've probably said enough to prove my primary point here. So essentially, more of your runs can start out weaker on average than was the case previously. And because of this, I think it's correct to spend a little bit more time thinking about early trials than it used to be. So it used to be that, like, basically in fight one, I would almost never pass on a trial. And now I'm starting to think, there's times in fight one where my deck isn't necessarily strong enough to make it through the fight without taking 20 plus pyre damage. And that's if things go well. So I think there's more times now where it is correct to turn off the 4-1 challenge than there were in the past. A lot of times previously, even if you take a good chunk of pyre damage in fight one, by fight two, your deck has improved enough where like you've stabilized enough that you're okay, you're not going to take too much pyre damage from here on out. But more of my runs recently have started out on the back foot, and if I took that initial trial to try to get stronger, I actually ended up taking 25 pyre damage or something like that in fight one, and that left me in a very precarious position for the rest of the run. So, especially with my Primordium starts, which tend to be either absolutely insane or, oh god, how am I going to make it through the next floor? Levels of powerful. Um, a lot of times I'm thinking, like, man, I can't take this armor trial if I have Planks as one of my starter cards, because otherwise these creatures are just going to walk up to the pyre and body me. Or similarly, staying on Primordium as an example, like, can I really take this plus attack trial when a train steward is eating Primordium? And I can't really just chump block with morsels because Plink isn't going to consistently make the morsels that I need. So overall, I think there's a lot to be thinking about in terms of how increasing the number of starting cards and increasing the number of starting cards that don't actually do damage to new creatures changes how you need to be thinking about the first couple of floors. This is a conclusion I came to after playing, oh, I don't know, ballpark 50 or 60 hours of the beta and maybe a dozen runs in the past week or so. So notably, on the beta, I had pretty much all the crowns here in case you've been staring at those and going like, why is this guy telling us what's going on with starter cards when he doesn't even have wins with very many combinations? Like, no. I've played a lot of these combinations quite a bit. I feel like I know what I'm doing. Um, so just kind of in closing here, watch your runs over the next couple of weeks as you continue to play Monster Train. And start looking at these times where you end up with two starter cards that don't do damage. Watch what happens to your run when you start with, Fade Primary and you have Restore Secondary or something like that. Just kind of watch how some of those fights develop and see what you think about taking the trials and maybe evaluate them a little bit differently than you used to. Anyway, please let me know if this one was helpful or if you agree or disagree. If people like this sort of stuff, I'll do some of these from time to time, replacing daily runs. But this is something that I just wanted to articulate mostly for myself. All right, have a great rest of the day.